Welcome to another episode of the Wealthy Podcast. I'm your host, Shauna Nyros, and today we are speaking with Erin Wile. She's a registered dietitian with Inspire Health, an organization that offers support services for cancer patients throughout British Columbia. Erin is lovely to talk to. She has a great perspective on how food and nutrition can really benefit people navigating a cancer journey, but also really practical advice for those of us that are just trying to figure out our relationship with food and how we can make better choices in our diets to support our well-being. As we record this podcast today, it's October, Breast Cancer Awareness Month. The stats around cancer are what they are. 1 in 8 women will develop breast cancer in their lifetime. And overall, 1 in 2 of us can expect to hear the words, "You have cancer," at some point in our lives. And I was one of them. For those listening who may not already know, I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2019. It's been almost 6 years. And the experience changed my life. I wish I had met our guest today back then. Erin Wile is a registered dietitian working with Inspire Health, an organization providing supportive cancer care across British Columbia. Erin is passionate about the power of food, not only for nourishment, but for also facilitating healing and connection. And she specializes in working with patients undergoing cancer treatment. But this episode is not just for people navigating a cancer diagnosis. It's for anyone who is curious about how food can have a dramatic impact on our health and well-being. And before we get started, a few fun facts about Erin. She started her career in forestry. That's interesting, but I kind of get it. I'm curious to hear that story. And now we can say we've had a husband and wife team on the Wealthy Podcast because Erin is married to Dr. Daryl Wile, one of our favorite KGH neurologists, which is how I first met her. So without further ado, welcome, Erin.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to chat.
Yes. I'd like to start with, we have a bit of an opening tradition on the Wealthy Podcast because most of the people that are choosing to be here to chat with us have a passion for health. And I just want to know, where did that start for you? Can you recall kind of an early experience or someone in your life? How did you develop your passion for health and well-being?
I love that question. And for me, I gave it some thought. And for me, I think it really stems from an experience I had when I was a child. When I was 11, I was diagnosed with a benign bone cyst. And so the years leading up to that, probably when I was about 8, I knew something was wrong. I could feel it. And so I became...
What part of your body was it?
It was in my hip.
Oh, okay.
So it wasn't visible from the outside, but it was quite large and it was really invading that whole space.
Yeah.
So I lost the ability to walk and I had a lot of urinary urgency and, without going into too much detail, there were lots of symptoms. And so from the time that I was about 8, I became really focused on this and trying to figure it out because from the outside, I looked the picture of health. I mean, I was a kid, right? So every time we went to the library, I remember I would take out books on health and I'd be learning more about the body and trying to figure out what could be going on. So I think that really shaped my interest and I really focused in on that. And then when I did end up getting the diagnosis and treatment and...
So you started to research this or all kind of aspects of health before you even had a diagnosis?
Yeah.
At 11?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I was 8 when I started.
Oh, 8.
Because I think I just, there's that knowing that something is not quite right. And so I really think about that a lot. And I have a lot of gratitude towards the medical team that finally diagnosed me, and the treatment I got at the Children's Hospital was amazing. And I just remember feeling this tremendous relief and gratitude, and obviously everything turned out great for me. I was really fortunate. But I think that just that experience really opened my eyes to healthcare and how important it is. And so that definitely set me on my course. But I'm very squeamish. So, I mean, I knew I'd never be a doctor or a nurse.
Oh, okay. Because I was going to say, you could have gone that direction.
Yeah. No, I could not have.
No.
Yeah.
So. But instead, you chose, okay, this is a word that I have not come across before. So if I mangle it, you can correct me.
Of course.
Silviculture?
Yeah, silviculture. So that's the regeneration side of forestry. So the harvesting is where you see the clear cuts and the silviculture is where you choose which species you're going to be replanted, and you're concerned with wildlife, preserving the wildlife that are in that area, and sort of all what I think is the feel good stuff.
Okay.
Right? That side of forestry.
Yeah. Giving back, making it good again.
Yeah.
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 Okay, so before we get too far deep into that whole story, because I understand it's kind of a cool one, I just, what's the mission that you're on, Erin, professionally? You're a dietitian, nutrition is your jam. Mm-hmm. You focus on cancer. What is your mission?
Yeah, no, I love that question too, and it's really evolved over time. I mean, I've been a dietitian for almost 20 years. And I've worked with chronic pain and diabetes and feeding issues for kids and all kinds of different areas. And I realized in the last few years that what I really aim to do is to improve people's relationship with food and their feeling about nutrition. It's not just about nourishing our body, but you mentioned how I really believe in the power of connection and healing. And I aim to work with every person and help them find that way to connect again and enjoy food and not feel that stress and overwhelm when it comes to deciding what to eat.
Mm. And I think in the last couple of decades, certainly, probably more, we've really gotten off course, I think, as a society with regards to our relationship with food. Mm-hmm. It's important to keep us alive, but we use it for a whole lot of things, some positive, but some not so positive.
Yeah.
And so how does that inform kind of your perspective on your work?
Yeah.
Are you trying to undo? Or are you trying to teach?
Oh my gosh, if I could undo, I would. But I think, there's a few different parts to that question. I think if we look at the wellness industry, it's a $70 billion industry. And what people have learned, I think everybody's exposed to nutrition messaging, health messaging on a daily basis, maybe more than once. I think what it's doing is it's disempowering people and making them feel like they can't make those decisions. They need some outward source to say, this is what you eat. This is what you do for exercise. This is how much you need to eat. And so it's very rules focused, and there's a whole lot less intuition and trust involved with people. So working with people and trying to undo some of those things that they've heard, it's a process. And I also suffer from that or struggle with that, right? Because I'm getting those same messages. And even though as a dietitian, my role is to provide evidence-based nutrition information, I still get sucked in sometimes. And I think, oh, this sounds really good. Let me try this. So it's very normal. It's human.
And it's interesting that, our media consumption habits, and I say this almost universally because I think that, unless you've completely sworn off social media, there has just been an explosion of sort of like short, bite-sized solutions. I'm going to fix your life. Take this pill. I fixed my life by only eating celery, or and it's really compelling when I think a lot of people are struggling, right?
Absolutely.
So you see these messages and it's like, oh, the carnivore diet or the keto, like it can be really compelling because you see these dramatic transformations in a minute and a half reel.
Yeah.
How do you, it's not my list of questions, but since we went there, how do you kind of like reconcile that with yourself and, your approach to your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think for myself, with social media, you have to remind yourself that a lot of these influencers, it's for personal gain or financial gain. So of course they're going to give you that the beautiful side of everything, right? I try to remember that a lot of these changes, I mean, there are some good things out there, absolutely. I've come across some wonderful influencers who only have really positive things to share, but a lot of them do recommend these quick fixes, and a lot of them aren't sustainable. So we have to really think about, what's going to work for me long term, what's going to feel good. And so I have to give myself pep talks a lot when I come across these things and say, you know what, Erin, this is probably too good to be true, right? Most things are. And sometimes, I've tried a couple things, but
celery.
Yeah, celery. Celery juice had
it did
a couple of years ago. It was huge.
Superhero celery.
Yeah. So there's always something that's kind of on the forefront, and there's some things that are kind of always in the background, but I get a lot of common questions, which I'm sure we'll end up chatting about.
Totally. I do think it's something that all of us are trying to figure out ourselves. And the one thing that kind of I noticed in a lot of when just sort of looking at your background and your approach is this notion that, nutrition is not one size fits all. So it's really, although those messages are compelling, it's so important to recognize that we are like a person, and our individual biology is really what should drive our choices. Keto might work for this person, but doesn't mean it's going to work for me. And I think that's kind of for me what is like how I sort of undo the desire to be like, wow, that was a major transformation. I'm gonna get on the celery juice train. Yeah. It's like, well, maybe it might not work for me.
Yeah.
No,
100%.
Tell me about how you go from starting your career in silviculture, look at me with my new word, to becoming a dietitian.
Yeah. So just backing up, I went straight from high school into sciences at UBC, and I've always loved the outdoors. It's a huge passion of mine. I always really enjoy hikes and just being in the forest. So I think I kind of romanticized that idea when I went into forestry, thinking it would just be walks in the park. It's not. And I knew fairly early on that, it wasn't going to be sustainable for me to be living in a tent for weeks on end. And I was even a Husqvarna chainsaw instructor. So I taught people how to use chainsaws. So, I mean, it was great for my personal growth.
I just had a really great mental picture of that.
Yeah. I did feel pretty hardcore, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I knew it wasn't going to be a long-term thing. At that time, as a woman in forestry, opportunities were really wonderful. So I did work for a few years. I knew I wasn't going to stay in that career, but I knew if I worked for a bit and really kind of thought through what I loved, I'd find something and I'd have the financial means to go back to school. So, and I've always loved cooking. From the time I was a young child, I loved making dinner for my family. I love baking. It's still one of my favorite things to do. And I watched family members manage chronic disease through nutrition, and it was always kind of a passion. And I remember at one point, I was having a conversation with a friend, and he said, why don't you become a dietitian? And it was like a light bulb went on. I'd never really considered it before. I thought, well, this is something I love so much. How could I make it into a job? But as soon as that conversation happened, it was like I knew exactly what I wanted to do. So yeah, that's sort of how I ended up.
And so then I'm curious, I'm asking this, in case there's anybody listening who has an interest in getting into the field or a child that maybe, so I'm asking because my daughter is very interested in nutrition and is thinking about that. So like, what do you do? Like, how do you become a dietitian?
So the typical, it's changed a bit since I graduated. So when I applied to the program, I applied at a few different schools. It's pretty competitive. It used to be about 30 students per year that they'd accept.
Oh, wow.
So having some volunteer experience is always helpful, right? And just talking to people, really understanding what the different avenues you can take within the field of dietetics is really helpful. So the degree is 4 years. It's a 4-year undergraduate degree. And when I did it, there was a separate internship that you would apply for. So I ended up going and doing my internship out of Queen's University in Kingston. But now it's a 5-year program. So once you apply and get in, you are guaranteed to be a registered dietitian at the end of that 5 years, as long as you pass the exam. Whereas when I graduated, some people wouldn't necessarily get matched with an internship the first year. So they might have a longer trajectory to get to that end goal.
Maybe before we sort of get into the specifics, I think a lot of people might use the words dietitian, nutritionist. I don't know. What do you got? Diet coach? Like, there's all these things that pop up. What's the distinction between a dietitian and a nutritionist?
Yeah. I love this question.
Oh, good.
Thank you. Yeah. So in BC, dietitian is a regulated term. So in order to call yourself a registered dietitian, you need to be registered with the college. So we're regulated health professionals. We need to prove that we're staying up to date and continuing with our training. Nutritionist is not a regulated term. So really anybody can call themselves a nutritionist.
Okay.
There are other provinces where nutritionist is also regulated.
But not in BC.
But not in BC. So that's the distinction there. And then health coach, nutrition coach, also not regulated.
Okay, so the point, I guess, being that if you're looking for a clinician, look for that distinction, a dietitian. Yeah, amazing. So I want to bridge now into your work at Inspire Health. So maybe you can just give sort of a high level of what Inspire Health is and what your role is there.
Yeah, absolutely. So Inspire Health is a nonprofit. We offer supportive cancer care. We have a team of physicians, counselors, exercise physiologists, and dietitians. And so the thing that I think differentiates us a bit is that there's no referral required. Obviously, we do get referrals from BC Cancer and specialists, but someone who has a cancer diagnosis, whether it's past or present, can come onto the website and register themselves. And then they're able to access all our services free of charge.
Wow.
Yeah, which is amazing, right? And then we put the patient at the center. So the patient gets to decide what services they want to engage with. So maybe in the beginning, they want to talk to a physician about their diagnosis and the different treatment options and just really work through what that means. And then maybe partway through treatment, they want some counseling or they want to talk to a dietitian about, how to best manage their nutrition, or maybe they're having some side effects. So there's all sorts of options and there's no expiration date on how they access the services. So it's very open. And I love that.
That is really. And so I guess if you're listening to this podcast and you're somebody that is, recently diagnosed or going through cancer treatment or even sort of post-treatment, this is Inspire Health is a service that you can access without a referral, which is, I think it's a big deal.
Absolutely.
And at no cost.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
And so what do you do there?
Yeah, so I offer nutrition counseling. I also do nutrition workshops weekly and then some cooking classes, which are really fun.
Amazing. Yeah. So, we talked a little bit about the role of kind of nutrition and how our relationship with food has changed just in general as a society. Let's hone in a little bit about the role of nutrition in cancer care. So can you kind of just pull back 10,000 foot level, theoretically, how do our food choices impact or inform your approach to a nutrition plan for people that are experiencing cancer? Yeah, am I asking that the right way? I feel like food is such an important component that truthfully, when I went through cancer treatment, was not addressed other than to say, don't take vitamins and all that. We can get into that.
Yeah.
So like,
yeah, that's a really broad question.
Yeah.
But I will say the recommendations for nutrition are largely the same for everybody at a general level. And then as someone's preparing for treatment, we do encourage, there's usually a need for an increase in protein because protein is the main macronutrient that supports the immune system. So without getting bogged down in the details or numbers, that's sort of something that we work on. Obviously, we recommend more plant foods. It doesn't mean you can't eat meat, but it just means add more plants, grains, vegetables, fruit.
So I'm gonna drill in on that. Why?
Yeah.
Because I heard that I should not eat meat if I have cancer.
Yeah. So again, we're working with evidence here.
Yeah.
So the American Institute of Cancer Research recommends limiting red meat specifically to 2 to 3 servings per week. So that's somewhere between 12 and 18 ounces. And that's red meat. So beef, pork, lamb, wild game for people who are hunters. Other meats like poultry, totally fine.
Or fish.
Great sources of protein. Yeah, fish, of course. Yes. And that has other benefits that we can talk about. But yeah, with the meat, that's the specific recommendation is to limit that. And then processed meats like bacon, deli meats, we recommend minimizing or eliminating if that's reasonable for you.
And can I ask why? Like specifically the red meat one. I think that's a big one for people to understand. What happened? What is the the response in the body that is informing that recommendation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to get too technical.
Oh, you can.
But the type of iron that's in red meat is heme iron. And heme iron has been specifically linked to an increase in colorectal cancer. So that's the main reason behind the red meat recommendation. And then as far as the processed meats go, we know that nitrates are not great for the body.
Right.
So that's sort of in a nutshell why we have those recommendations.
And what about like inflammatory response? Because that was sort of the reason I don't want to say given, because I just feel like, it's talked about a lot that, meat and in particular red meat causes an inflammatory response in the body, which kicks in, your immune system. Is that part of it?
I think...
Or am I just watching too much TikTok?
Well, I think maybe a bit. But also, I think it ties into how meat affects the gut microbiome, which is that healthy diversity of bacteria in your body. So we know that plant foods support the growth of that healthy bacteria, whereas meat, not so much, right? And so if someone's taking in a huge amount of meat, then they're not going to have that same diversity in that flora. So, and that impacts how food is digested, how much is absorbed. So it doesn't mean red meat is bad and that we can't have it. It just means that we don't want to overdo it. But I always use the analogy with people, broccoli, anyone would probably say it's a healthy food. But if you're eating broccoli 3 times a day, every day, it's actually not so healthy because it's pushing out that variety and those other options you could be including. Right?
Totally.
And so that kind of ties into my whole focus with everybody I talk to. And it's more so, what can we add in versus what do we have to take away? It's a positive spin on nutrition.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that you brought up broccoli.
Yeah.
Because, okay, do you know where I'm going with this?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I love broccoli. Okay. I do. With cheese sauce, without roasted. It doesn't matter. I do. I love it.
Broccoli.
Yeah.
I just don't like the way it makes my house smell. It smells like somebody tooted in my house. Anyway, Jason, can you edit that out? But the reason why I'm gonna ask you about broccoli is because, and this is, this has been my personal experience, right? So I had breast cancer. It was early stage breast cancer. And for me, and I'm not going to get into the specifics because that's not what this is about, but in my particular case, chemotherapy had would have a potentially very small impact on my risk of recurrence. It was 6%. They give you these numbers, right?
Yeah.
And so at the time also, I had been doing a deep dive into some of the metabolic influences on cancer and cancer treatment and recovery and all of that stuff. And I had read that broccoli, in particular broccoli sprouts, are like a superfood when it comes to some of the mechanisms for like promoting an anti-cancer diet, right? And so I would joke to my people and say, I chose broccoli sprouts over chemotherapy. Is there anything to that?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. I mean, we know, again, going back to the plant-based foods, we know that the cruciferous vegetables, so broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, all those leafy greens, have tremendous capacity to help fight cancer. So along with that, we have, there's thousands of polyphenols and antioxidants and all different kinds and different vegetables and fruit. Yeah, exactly. Every vegetable, every fruit is going to have a different type, right? So that's why we really emphasize variety. So broccoli is amazing. Broccoli sprouts, even more so.
Why? Why sprouts?
Just more concentrated. Yeah. So, and again, if you can't access broccoli sprouts, if that's not realistic for you, that doesn't mean that you're not going to be well, right? We just want to emphasize getting it however you can. And I talk to people about that. I see people who are up north, and I used to work up north, and I know I'd be excited if I went to the grocery store and got that one apple that was fresh. Everything else was in a can. So just normalizing that everyone is in a different place. They might not have the financial means. They might not have the access to certain foods, and it's still okay. They will still be healthy. So frozen foods are okay. Canned foods, as long as you're choosing the right ones, are absolutely fine and very supportive.
I want to get into all of that.
I know. How long do you have?
Like, what canned foods? I thought those were awful. Okay. Thank you for permitting me to kind of go a little bit on my own quest. But I do think it's helpful because there's so much when you're staring down a cancer diagnosis and you're in treatment, you're really kind of consumed with decisions and like a lot of information coming at you. And one of the considerations that sort of takes a back seat is like the food part. And I kind of want to get into that because it's important that we try to shift that a little bit as well. Because it's just, in my opinion, it is a hugely complementary modality, like your nutrition, that runs alongside
absolutely.
Right. And if you make great food choices, it only helps your ability to receive treatment,
100%.
recover from treatment. And then maybe we can also talk a little bit about opportunities for prevention. I don't know if that's a thing, but boy, it would be great if it was.
Yeah.
What are some common misconceptions about nutrition and cancer care that you often find yourself addressing with your clients and their families?
Number one, people often feel that they've done something to cause the cancer. So I do find myself quite often saying, you did not cause your cancer. I mean, there's so many different factors that we don't even understand, but taking that blame and that pressure and that horrible feeling away from people, or trying to alleviate that feeling of guilt and like they've done something terribly wrong to cause this, is a focus. In terms of commonly asked questions, number one is, does sugar feed cancer?
Yes.
Number one.
Does it?
No.
Wow, you heard it here, folks.
Yeah. So the connection between sugar and cancer is very indirect. So how can I simplify this?
You know what? You don't have to just lay it out, because I do think that is a huge misconception.
Yeah. Well, and it's perpetuated in media, right?
Oversimplified.
And so I speak to people who've not only cut out candy and maybe pop, but they've also cut out all fruit. They've just gone very extreme, and that's stressful. It's not sustainable, and it just causes more anxiety. And without getting into too much detail about that piece, we know that when people are relaxed, when they're eating, when they're engaging that parasympathetic nervous system, they're digesting better and they're absorbing more nutrients. So if you're in a constant state of overwhelm and stress, you're not actually going to be getting the benefits from a lot of the foods you're eating, regardless of what they are. So,
Erin is having an interesting relationship with her mic.
I'm just getting really friendly with it. Yeah. So where was I?
Well, sugar and the link between sugar and cancer.
Right. Thank you. So the connection is very indirect. So people who are choosing a lot of processed foods, a lot of high sugar foods, not a ton of nutrients there, tend to be at a larger weight. And we know that one of the risk factors of getting cancer is being in a larger body. Now, I always need to qualify that because many people in larger bodies are incredibly healthy, right? So I think it's important just to recognize it's more about the connection between eating a lot of those processed foods and people's tendency to carry a bit of extra weight. So the main recommendation when it comes to sugar is to avoid or limit sugar-sweetened beverages because that's the number one sugar-containing food that North Americans tend to overdo. And that doesn't mean you can never have a can of pop. Like if you're going to a movie, please go ahead. But if it's a daily thing for you, if you're having multiple cans of Coke a day, then maybe that's something we look at. You know, what can we add in instead?
What about juice?
Yeah, so juice is a good one too, right? Because the difference between a juice and a can of pop is that juice comes from fruit. So it's got tons of vitamins and minerals and antioxidants. So it's giving you some nutrition, right? But if we want to take it a step further and get even more nutrition, I'd recommend a smoothie because then you still have the fiber, right? Because the whole fruit is still in there. And so then that's going to have less of an impact on your blood sugar levels, which is important, whether we have diabetes or not. So
where do you think this misconception about sugar feeding cancer comes from? I mean, I've heard it a lot, and I feel like it sounds very plausible. So maybe you can unpack that a little bit.
And, you know, I would say probably an oncologist would be so much better at this, but I'll do my best. So when someone goes in for a PET scan, for example, which is the scan that they do just to see where cancer might be in the body, they get an IV injection of a glucose solution, which is sugar. And it's injected straight into the bloodstream. And the cancer cells will preferentially pick up that glucose. So I think that's where it all came from, right? Thinking, okay, well, I've just been injected with glucose. The cancer is sucking it right up. Obviously, sugar feeds cancer. So, okay, that's true. Except, well, not that sugar feeds cancer, but it's true that the cancer cells pick up the glucose preferentially. But that does not mimic real life.
Right.
So in no case are we injecting sugar straight into our bloodstream.
Right.
I hope you're not.
No.
If you are, please stop.
Right.
But when we eat, food has to be digested and absorbed, and it's completely different.
And like you said, like the microbiome in your gut has a lot to do with how you're metabolizing.
And our stress levels and all these things and how we're combining foods, right? So again, that focus on what can we add in to balance our overall glycemic load, which is sort of just the amount of sugar combined with fiber, protein, healthy fats that help to mediate that blood sugar rise.
And the issue with the blood sugar spike is that you get these sort of like ups and downs in terms of like your need to consume more calories, right, for energy.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely if you have a blood sugar spike, there's usually that subsequent crash where you feel tired and maybe some more cravings for sure.
Yeah.
But also it's harder on the body over time. So if you're going up and down like a roller coaster, the body has to work harder and it can do it. But why make it work so hard if we can do some things to help alleviate that?
And so then just to kind of close the loop on the sugar piece, the recommendation that you would give your patients is like to try to replace some of those really processed high sugar choices with satisfying alternatives that are more nutritious. And what would those like be?
Well, also that balance, right? I think it's so and again, kind of going back to that, it doesn't mean you have to cut it out completely. But if you're going to have, I always use Nanaimo bars as an example because they're my favorite.
Yeah.
They're my favorite. If I'm going to eat one, I'm going to eat it and I am going to enjoy every bite. I'm going to tune right in and I'm going to savor it.
Yeah.
Right? And then I'm getting so many benefits other than, there is some nutrition in there.
The experience of eating the Nanaimo
But it
bar.
makes a difference. If you're eating it and you're just riddled with guilt, then what's the point?
Or you're just eating it randomly watching a show or
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, if someone is choosing to have a sweet treat, I recommend having it at the end of a meal. Because then your body's going to already be digesting, hopefully, some balance there, some protein, healthy fat, some fiber. So that would be a recommendation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. Like, it's like not different for cancer. And maybe it is a little bit. And we can get into some specifics for cancer patients. But it's really just sort of universally like general good choices and advice around nutrition. So that's... It's not just specific for cancer patients. It's really for all of us.
Exactly. And that's what I try and reassure people because I always ask, do you live alone? Are you cooking for someone else? Do you have kids? Do you have allergies in the house? Nothing that I recommend to people is unsafe for anyone else. Right? Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so then let's go there. How does nutrition planning differ, or does it, based on the stage of treatment that a cancer patient might be in? And how can thoughtful integration of nutrition help people that are going through cancer kind of like navigate and perhaps experience better outcomes and improved well-being? So let's start with I am newly diagnosed. I am pre-treatment. What are some things that I can do in that horrible interim stage where I'm riddled with anxiety and stress and so many unanswered questions, and maybe I don't want to eat it all because that's what my anxiety is doing to me, or I just want to eat everything because food feels comfortable to me.
Yeah.
What would your advice be?
Yeah. So, those are two kind of, everybody's different, right? So my process is chatting with the person, asking them if they have any burning questions, if there's things that, are really scaring them.
Yeah. Like, should I stop eating entirely?
Exactly.
And that's what I did. Like, I'm going to be, again.
Yeah, please.
My experience was I in that pre sort of treatment phase, had read something. It was a study actually that said intermittent fasting is really beneficial for people with cancer. And so I was like, great. Okay. I'm just going to stop eating, which actually felt like fine for me because I didn't want to eat. I offer that as just sort of a personal experience.
No, I appreciate
What would you say to me?
And you're not alone.
Yeah.
What would I say to you? I would probably bring out some of the evidence we have around intermittent fasting and the magic number. And this is very specific to breast cancer. So let me just add that disclaimer in. Is somewhere between 13 and 14 hours. So I do encounter people who are eating in a very small window. Maybe it's 4 hours, maybe it's 6 hours. Really tough.
Right.
To get adequate nutrition in that amount of time without having 2 massive meals. So I'd say the number one thing that I recommend to people is trying to maintain their weight.
Right. Okay.
Right. So, and focusing on the foods that feel comforting and not trying to put too much pressure on themselves. So a lot of people feel nauseous, anxious, they don't want to eat. So maybe it's more often eating smaller snacks that are balanced. And over the course of the day, you can get great nutrition doing that, right? Focusing on making sure they're getting enough protein, keeping everything as healthy and strong as possible leading into treatment, because outcomes are always better when someone's well nourished.
And is there any, have you come across that evidence that intermittent fasting has a benefit for women diagnosed with breast cancer?
Yes. So that's where that 13-hour is kind of the magic window.
So
or the
13
hours
of fasting.
and then an 11-hour eating window, right?
Which is, so I feel like, doable.
Yeah, it's much more reasonable than what a lot of people are expecting.
Yeah, like
they're thinking
18
it's
and 6.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and it's very reasonable to get 3 balanced meals and maybe 1 or 2 snacks in that period of time. So,
and then and you can be like, I don't know, I'm not the expert in that. But what happens when, and in this particular case, the non-eating window, so the fasted duration, what is happening that is sort of promoting this benefit for breast cancer patients?
Yeah. So I mean, without, providing you with, I can provide you with a study another time, but in a nutshell, the longer our body has to rest overnight, that's when everything gets repaired. So again, when I was talking about blood sugar and trying to manage it, let's just help the body not have to work so hard. Yeah. So it can focus on doing what it does best while we're resting versus spending the first few hours digesting food.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I came across that study, and I will say that I was new to intermittent fasting, and my window was similar to the one you've described. I think I was like 14 and 10, and it felt really good to me. I think what is compelling to me about the discussion around nutrition and cancer care is empowering patients to participate in their own treatment.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the thing. If intermittent fasting doesn't feel good, please don't do it. And I actually had a patient 2 days ago who was post-treatment. She's always been very athletic, really into weight training, and she's getting back into it. And so she did hire some coaches, and they had her ramping up her protein. And she said to me, I feel like I just need to talk through it. And after she explained what she was doing, her protein intake was really, really high. And I said, how does it feel? And she said, I feel nauseous when I look at chicken now. And I said, so when did it feel good? And she said, it felt good a few weeks ago when I was at this level and I was still able to eat my salad every day. Now I don't even have room for the salad. And I said, well, maybe it's about going back to where you feel good. That's what's most important, right? You're not going to be able to keep doing something that doesn't feel good and feel supportive and is making you want to be sick. So I think that's really important that some people do really well. Like the intermittent fasting felt good for you. For other people, it's not realistic, and that's okay. It's not make or break, right?
And I think, the point is that, there's so many things when you are diagnosed with cancer that are outside of your control. And I don't want to get into disordered eating, like all of that, because I know there's a control piece around that. Yeah. That conversation, separate conversation. But for me, I've never had that issue with food. But I felt very disempowered when I was first diagnosed with cancer because I didn't know anything. I was basically at the mercy of kind of like the diagnosis and the treatment plan. And I found that for me, being able to participate in what I thought, I did my own research, what I thought were practices that were helping me, really helped me mentally.
Absolutely.
Get through. You know, you talk about the potential for food to help with healing and connection. For me, it was probably one of the most powerful choices that I could make in my life to feel like I was taking back some control, because you feel so out of control.
100%. Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point. And a big part of what Inspire Health does and what we try to encourage is that stress reduction piece. So giving people that feeling of some autonomy throughout the process.
Right. But the problem is most people don't know what their options are, right? Do I intermittent fast? Do I do this? Should I eat more protein, less protein?
It's so overwhelming.
Yeah. And that's where I think knowing about Inspire Health and people like you that can say, okay, let's help you take back control of this particular piece.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. So amazing. Okay. So then let's talk about during treatment, because all kinds of interesting, if you're a cancer patient, there's all sorts of different treatment plans. There's surgery, radiation therapy, chemotherapy. There's post sort of all of that's adjuvant treatments.
Hormone therapy.
Yeah, exactly. So when if a patient is in that treatment phase, let's talk specifically about chemotherapy, because I think that one is probably the most disruptive. What is some of the advice that you give patients that are in that phase, just with regards to their nutrition and what they can expect too?
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's different for everybody. I could have two people who on paper are identical and have a completely different experience through chemotherapy. Some people breeze through it. Yeah. Some people get every potential side effect, right? Yeah. So one of the most common ones is nausea. So, and every single person, I'm going to probably recommend something a little bit different, which is why my job will never be boring, because I'm always kind of tailoring recommendations to people. But yeah, it's sort of about working with the nausea, helping people to understand that the more consistently we eat, actually that helps with nausea. So smaller amounts more often, focusing on the foods that feel good. So some people, I'll be on a call with them and they'll say, you know what, all I've had this week is chicken, soup, and bananas. That's okay. Right. So it's normalizing that we can actually rely on some of those foods that feel good, the comfort foods, because this is just a window in time. If we zoom out, what we eat over the course of a week or 2 weeks is not going to make or break our health, right? So it's just really important to stay nourished and to stay strong. So getting something in, whatever it might be, that's really the focus when it comes to nausea. And then if people are struggling with taste changes, we have little strategies to change flavors. Sometimes people find they have that metallic taste in their mouth. That's a really common one. Even switching to like bamboo cutlery.
Interesting.
Can make a huge difference for people. So sometimes it's something really simple. Excuse me. But yeah, there's so many different strategies we can implement, and it is a bit of trial and error for a lot of people.
And what about the emotional, I was so grateful that I didn't have to experience chemotherapy, but I have a lot of empathy and I have a lot of friends that have. And I know part of it is like this, on top of everything, I can't even enjoy the things that I love to eat. How do you address that?
Honestly, it's validation and acknowledgement and empathy. I have tremendous empathy for people who all of a sudden, coffee, it turns their stomach. And so, there's not always going to be a solution to every problem, but I think there's tremendous value in just talking to someone and having them acknowledge that it sucks. And, ideally, when the treatment is finished, things will normalize and we can work on rebuilding. So focusing a bit on that and the idea that it's short term, and of course, coming up with maybe some solutions along the way. But that's also where it's really fortunate that I work within this type of team. So sometimes, I say to someone, maybe this is something you want to talk to a counselor about and just work through it. And it's beautiful that I can do that and just say, hey, I want to refer you to this person. And then we can work together. Right.
Yeah. I think that's such an amazing service that Inspire Health provides. I wish I had known about it. And I'm so happy we're doing this so that other people can really engage with the services. It's funny. We had a podcast guest on, Carly, a couple of months ago, and she is a breast cancer survivor and she went through chemotherapy, and she was sharing that she had experienced the nausea and the loss of appetite, and she'd lost weight, and that somebody had recommended that she try CBD. Is that like a thing? Her story is really funny. So if you haven't listened to that episode, you got to go listen to it, because it had to do with CBD suppositories.
Okay. So this is where, as a dietitian, I will never make recommendations on supplementation or any kind of medication.
Right.
I always will direct people to the pharmacist or the oncologist, and then find, the nutrition piece that might be able to help. So absolutely. And again, it's very personal.
Yeah.
So if it worked for her, I think that's amazing. But as far as, me saying, yes, this is something that would be great, I can't do that.
It's not your thing.
But it's not my area. Yeah. So it's out of scope.
Out of scope. Beyond the scope of practice.
Yes.
Fair.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if it worked for her, but it certainly gave her and her husband some comic relief.
Yeah, I'm sure. And we all need that, right?
Totally.
Especially in that kind of period of time. You need something to giggle about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Giggling is fun. Yeah. And then, so we've sort of talked about pre-treatment, during treatment, post-treatment. Mm-hmm. So now we're in recovery. Now we're hopefully sort of on a path to prevention of recurrence and remission and all of that stuff. Yeah. How do things or do they change in that particular phase? Yeah.
So it again kind of reverts back to just those general recommendations. If people can add more plants, that's great. Okay. And for a lot of people who've been through chemotherapy, that really does a number on the gut microbiome because chemotherapy
it just kills everything.
Exactly. Yeah. So a lot of times when I'm meeting with people, we'll focus on rebuilding that. And again, some of the best ways to do that are to add more plant foods because the plant foods are the ones that promote that healthy bacteria.
Get your broccoli sprouts out.
Get some whole grains, some fruit.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I actually came to the table loving cruciferous vegetables.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a hard one for me, but for people that maybe are not used to eating so many vegetables, why is it important? Like, I know we've talked about plants and you've mentioned fiber. Tell me, every dietitian I talk to is just like, fiber is the queen of everything.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, let's just talk about the digestive system and elimination.
Right.
Right. And I talk to people about every single patient I ask about that because that's a really good marker of how things are working. If someone's fluctuating between diarrhea and constipation all the time, something's not quite right. Obviously treatment's going to impact that, but in the absence of treatment, if you're having those kinds of issues, maybe we need to focus on the different types of fiber. And not only is fiber important, but if you're having fiber, you need adequate fluid. So I'll talk to people who are eating a ton of fiber, but they're not getting enough to drink. And then fiber sucks up water. So if it's not got a lot of fluid, it just blocks things up, right? Mm-hmm. And then some movement is also really important to help keep things flowing. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of the digestive piece. And along with that, fiber slows digestion. So it allows, again, that blood sugar to stay a little bit more even. So it'll just allow your body to process things more slowly.
So what are some really great sources of fiber that, for those of us that might prefer other things?
Yeah. Oh, no, 100%. And that's the thing. It doesn't have to be a complete 180, right? It might be switching from white bread for toast in the morning to a brown bread or a whole grain bread.
Yeah.
That's a positive. Maybe it's, you're having a burger and you have a salad on the side. Right? Mm-hmm. Or half fries, half salad. That's what I like to do.
Me too.
Right? It's all about, small steps that add up over time, right? It's sustainable change, little things, because that's what makes the difference long term. You don't have to change everything all at once. Right? Even though I think a lot of people, that's their instinct. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, and it's probably the area I struggle with most. I like fruit and vegetables. I probably a lot of vegetables, but I still feel like I probably am not getting enough just based on the way things.
Well, fun fact,
eliminate.
90%. Yeah, 9.
I don't know how I say
I see what you're saying.
Maybe I'm not drinking enough water.
But 90% of Canadians don't get enough fruits and vegetables. And I know, I'm a dietitian, right? I talk about this all day and I still struggle.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because we're human. So nobody's perfect every day.
Is it like celery? Can you eat celery? Like what's some things?
I love celery, but for a lot of people, celery is just a vehicle for dip. right? And so I just want to say, if there's
actually
a vegetable,
vegetables are a vehicle for dip. Like, who
and
are we
I love
kidding?
dip. Dip
Yeah.
is great.
Yeah.
So, and that's the thing, right? Also normalizing. If you don't like raw veggies, eat them cooked.
Yeah.
It's okay. If you don't like to eat cooked veggies, puree them into a soup. There's experiment with different ways to get them in. So it doesn't have to be this traditional, half your plate is a bunch of raw vegetables and a plain chicken breast and some, dry potatoes. It doesn't have to look like that. If you want sauce, add the sauce, right?
Yeah.
So it's just a little bit more freedom when it comes to food. That's the goal.
I am really oversharing in this conversation. Now you know.
It's great. I love it.
Yeah. Like, what if okay, this is the last question, because I always think next time I talk to a dietitian, I'm going to ask this question. So in my quest to get more fiber, I did what a lot of people do. I was going to say like the old people, but now I'm one of them because I'm 50. I bought the Metamucil.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's psyllium fiber.
Okay.
Some people choose the type that you mix into water.
Yeah.
Some people choose the caplets. And yes, absolutely. That's fine. Yeah, there's no harm in that at all. That's a soluble fiber. Absolutely.
Okay.
Again, I just emphasize the importance of adequate fluid.
Right. Okay. There you heard it here, folks. You can have the Metamucil.
Not sponsored by Metamucil.
Drink your water.
No name brand is also fine.
Totally. Oh, Erin, you're awesome. I wish I could have you on the podcast every week.
Oh, that's kind.
So I want to ask quickly, we're almost out of time. This has been such a great conversation. For family and friends that are helping a loved one navigate a cancer diagnosis. And, this is what, like, we hear of this all the time. Somebody has been diagnosed with cancer and everyone wants to do something to say, I love you and I'm here for you. And that usually involves food.
Yes. Yes, because food is love for so many people, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So what would you say? Like, what would you recommend? What are good choices for, I think there's two considerations. What's good for the person experiencing and then also the families, right? Because a lot of the times it's like, oh, I'll bring you a tuna casserole or whatever.
Yeah.
That's my go-to because I'm not like you. I don't love cooking. It's just...
And did I say I love cooking? I love baking.
Okay. All right. Fun.
No, that's a really good question. And I think the instinct is to just overwhelm people with food. So I always recommend, because I didn't mention this, but Inspire Health also offers programs for support people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So family members.
Yeah. Yeah. So I always tell people, just have an ongoing conversation with the patient because what they want today might not be what they want tomorrow.
Right.
And so ask, ask. And maybe it's just someone sitting with them while they eat to help distract them a little bit in a healthy way. And, patience is a big one, trying to push or take away the focus on how much the person is eating, because you can guarantee they're thinking about that and they're probably anxious about it. So just giving them space, asking the questions, saying what feels good for you. Is it ice cream today? Is it a tuna casserole? Is it a jar of pickles? Who knows, right? So, and knowing that from week to week, it often changes, and just having the patience and that ongoing conversation is really helpful.
And as you said so beautifully, food is love.
Yeah.
And, I think one of the things that my husband and I had to navigate when I was going through my cancer experience was like, he felt very helpless. And what I ended up doing for him was I made him a list of all of the ways that he could support me, like meaningfully support me throughout the whole thing. And he was so grateful because it gave him like tasks,
something to do, focus on.
Yeah. And one of those things in hindsight could have been, help me eat good things or, something to that regard. Like, because his love language is food, which I didn't actually even think about until we started talking about this, is that I could have included something about that on that list. It was more just like rub my back and like give me a kiss before you go to work. But all of those things. Yeah. But maybe for those of you listening that are supporting a loved one, think about how you can show your love and support through supporting food.
And if it's not food, maybe it's doing a load of laundry or cleaning a toilet, or something that takes some pressure off in another area, right?
Totally. So. I love that. Okay. I still have a couple questions. Don't get mad at me, Carly. We ran a little bit long today. If you could, so now just in general, I think I might already know the answer to this, but when it comes to nutrition, if you could give our listeners just one piece of advice that would pretty much benefit everybody, what would it be with regards to nutrition, their diet?
Just one?
Just one. One.
It's hard. I've got two that are really high up there.
You have two.
So number one, eat more plants. But possibly edging that out is practice tuning in to your body when you're eating, because your body will tell you, how you feel when you eat certain foods. That. I think that's something that we disconnect because of all the media and everything we're reading. We don't trust ourselves. We don't tune in and kind of think like that patient I referred to earlier with the protein. She was sort of pushing away her body's messages because she wanted to do the thing. So the more we
probably worked for somebody else.
Totally. And that's the thing. But if we can regain a bit of that trust and just tune in and see how we feel in response to different foods, that will help to direct us.
Okay. So I love that. I'm going to ask you to unpack that a little bit, just because I feel like for so many people, that is really like, what do you mean? I know what you mean. I know what you mean. I have that practice. What are some of the things, like when you're tuning in, like, let's go like physically, like, are we looking for bloating? Are we looking for energy levels? Like, what are the things? I would
just go even more simple.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Like, I'm eating this meal. Do I feel satisfied? Not only am I full, but do I feel satisfied? A lot of times people have, a really beautiful meal, but maybe it's missing something. Maybe it doesn't have enough fat. Maybe it doesn't have enough protein. And so I think distinguishing between fullness and satisfaction is really important. And then when I say tuning in, I'll go back to my Nanaimo bar example. It's really, it might be closing your eyes. It might be just like, really feeling it and experiencing it. For a lot of people, that's maybe a little too woo-woo. But it is for a lot of people too, a helpful practice. But yeah, just sort of getting to know your body again.
Yeah. And I do think, for people that are experiencing cancer, that are going through these really invasive, for lack of a better word, treatments, rebuilding a relationship with the sort of feedback of your body is really valuable. But I also just think that's a valuable practice for everybody.
Absolutely.
I know when I eat a cheeseburger from McDonald's, and nothing against McDonald's, love their cheeseburgers. I know it feels good in the moment, but then I feel like shit after. I said, oh my gosh, I think that's the first time I ever said it. That's my, like, that's when I think of McDonald's cheeseburger now, I'm like, I go immediately to, I feel like crap after.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's your body's feedback, right?
And so I listen to that before I order the cheeseburger, even though I know it would taste so good.
Well, and once in a while, right?
Yeah.
But that's a really great example, because that's for you. You've listened to that feedback. And so you're going to think about that, and maybe it changes your choices sometimes, right?
I also love your example about the Nanaimo bar, because I have an ongoing, like, love-hate relationship. We're naming all these things with, okay, you get them at Costco. They're the Brookside They're like chocolates. They're chocolate covered acai berries or something like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And they have different fruits.
Yes, they have different fruits. But the one at Costco has a combination of acai and blueberries. And literally, like, I want to just eat them.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah.
And I chastise myself for that.
Well, don't.
Okay.
Don't.
Can I just like say, I'm going to have 5?
Well, you could, but you could also just, at the end of a meal. So don't go
don't eat them first.
Well, don't go at them starving, right? It doesn't matter what. If you're starving and you put something like a block of cheese in front of me, I'll probably eat the whole block of cheese. But then it's all about the balance and the different signals we're sending to our brain. We didn't talk about the gut-brain connection, but it's very powerful. When we combine foods, studies show that we're satisfied sooner. So maybe you're having those chocolate-covered berries with a handful of nuts.
Ooh.
And you're going to feel more satisfied sooner.
Thank you for that tip. Because I've gotten in the habit of eating them after a meal.
Yeah.
But then I'm like, I just want to eat more of them. Like, I don't seem to have like this, I don't know, off button when it comes. It's like there's like what is the dopamine kind of like? I think I talked about this with Daryl.
Oh, yeah? Oh, I'm sure you did. I'm sure you did.
The neurology behind food, right? Yeah. Like just a little squirt.
So I would just to, because I am mindful of the time, but I would challenge you to just allow yourself one day to just eat as many as you want until you feel like you're done. And so I think by taking away those limits and that good versus bad, that changes a lot of things too, and takes away the power of the food and gives it back to you.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll let you know how that goes.
Yeah, please do.
Quickly, what about alcohol?
That's a big one.
Okay.
And I recommend everyone talk to their GP or their oncologist. We don't have any study. It's not ethical to study alcohol intake, so we don't have any safe limits. And I know the recommendations have changed significantly. Yeah. Right? So a lot of people who are going through treatment have no desire to drink alcohol. It's definitely very personal. So it's always worthy of a more in-depth discussion with the medical team.
Yeah. And I appreciate that. I know it is the recommended alcohol intake. I don't know what you call it for just regular people is 1 to 2 a week.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, my uninformed, not research-based theory is that it should be probably 0 because but unfortunately that's not reasonable. You can't just go to community and say just none.
Well, that's the thing. And some people are drinking 14 a week, so getting down to 10 or 12 is fantastic. Yeah, totally. Right? So it's again very individual.
Yeah. What are you having for dinner tonight?
This is, I am not prepared for this question. I actually don't know.
It was on the list, Erin.
I know. It's funny. Yesterday I did a cooking class and I made, it was like an ancient grains feature kind of. So I did a sorghum recipe and a millet recipe. I know it sounds so healthy, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sounds like I want to chew a lot.
Yeah. But I made these really great, this just sounds so typical dietitian, doesn't it? You know what? We're having burgers and fries. Or quesadillas or tacos, something quick. Something quick.
Yeah. Well, everybody's got to live realistically.
Yeah,
too,
exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
I'm going to just wrap up with a couple questions about your perspective on health. How has your definition of health or what constitutes health care changed over the years?
Oh, yeah. That's
back from little Erin and her cyst.
Yeah. I think earlier on, I would have always just considered physical health and honestly, outward appearance. And then through my practice, I've seen someone who's outwardly the picture of health very, very sick and vice versa. So I think now I consider obviously the physical piece, but mental health, I realize, is so important. I think once you have kids, things shift a little bit. So I think recognizing that there are many facets to health, physical, emotional, spiritual, all those pieces are important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. And that's why we made this podcast.
Yeah.
And then finally, you know, I know you are a householder, wife, a mom. You participate very actively in community. So I'm going to ask you, just recognizing that there are many facets to what we are defining health as. In what areas of your life do you feel, like we say, health is wealth?
Yeah.
What areas of your life do you feel wealthy?
Yeah, that's another. These are so many good questions. Honestly, I think we talked a little bit before the podcast started about our kids. My kids are 15, 13, and 10, and they're becoming these amazing young adults. And I couldn't be more proud. Obviously, I'm biased, but watching them evolve is just absolutely one of the best things you could ever experience, right? So I feel very fortunate to have them. I learn something from them every day. And then shifting gears a bit, I think, you know, we've lived all over, but Kelowna is such a gorgeous place. And for me, nature is so vital to my overall health and well-being. And we have so many opportunities here, even in our backyard, just going for a hike. I just feel so fortunate to be living in this beautiful place. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we just take it for granted. But then when you really think about it, it's like, oh yeah.
Oh, 100%.
It is the best place to live.
Yeah. I grew up here. Couldn't wait to get out. Swore I'd never come back. And here I am. So what does that tell you?
And here she is. Oh, Erin, this has just been such a fun conversation.
Yeah.
Your energy is really contagious. I can tell that you practice what you preach when it comes to your health and well-being, and your kids are blessed to have you, and so is Daryl. He's a pretty cool guy.
I hope he's listening.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for joining me in this conversation this morning. I think that there's so many benefits that we can all take from really sound advice on our diet and nutrition, and how our relationship with food is so critical to our overall health and well-being. So thank you for coming, and maybe one day we can have you back and get to all the things on my list that I didn't even get
Part
to.
two. Yeah.
Part two.
It's been really fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Anytime.